As part of the Vincentian family, I worked on the formation of the working group to end homelessness. I'm presently a member of that executive committee, and I'm also serving my second term as a member of the executive committee for the NGO Committee on Social Development. I am very pleased to welcome you all here today, but I have an even better welcome. So I would like to begin our program by inviting Lydia Stazen, Chair of the Working Group to End Homelessness, to come forward and to officially welcome you to this event and set our goals. Lydia presently holds the position of Executive Director of the Ruff Institute for Global Homelessness at DePaul University. And prior to that, she held executive leadership roles in anti-poverty organizations across the Midwest in the United States. Lydia, please take the mic.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning to those of you who are in the room today, and hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to those of you who are online. We had such an incredible response to our invitation. I think we had more than 200 people registered for the online attendance, and it's also great to have so many of you here in the room today. So thank you for making the time. I want to recognize my colleagues from the working group. We had a small core team of folks who were working on putting this event together, led by Marianne, Jean, Jimmy, Tiffany, Cecily. So thank you so much to those colleagues for all the work that went into this event. And we're so delighted to have representation here from the Ambassador of Poland and from UN Habitat and from our partners SAMVIN and Unanima International. So we're going to have a wonderful conversation here today. We have speakers also online, so it really is truly a hybrid event. So our working group is a collective of approximately 30 international organizations that all really have a mission and care and concern for addressing the issue of homelessness around the world, which we know from the most recent data is increasing in almost every country around the world. And we see very clearly the global drivers of these issues. We know that homelessness won't be ended locally unless we also look at the global drivers of it. So that's the view that we take at the working group and at the Institute of Global Homelessness. So without further ado, thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to a great conversation today.
Thank you, Lydia. Yes, we're very happy to have all of you present here today. And we were anticipating some representatives of the members of the UN missions. So is there anyone in the room representing a UN mission? Because we did see some registered here.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm from the Polish mission.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. And we were anticipating there was at least one or two others. Okay. So hopefully when they come in, we can get them introduced to all of you. As Lydia said, we're very pleased with the online presence as well as your in-person presence. I will briefly introduce each speaker. Their biographies would be available on our website and or in the chat room if for those who are online. And so we also ask that if you're online, you put your questions in the chat room. They will be monitored, and we will have a question and answer period after all of the speakers conclude, and hopefully there'll be plenty of time to make comments and get a dialogue going. So let us begin without further delay. It is the great honor of the working group to end homelessness to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Krzysztof Maria Sikorski, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Permanent Representative of the Republic of Poland to the United Nations. To this panel, Ambassador Sikorski has the title of Professor of Social Sciences, having completed his PhD and postdoctoral degree from the Jagiellonian University Institute of Political Sciences and International Relations. He's held various positions in the government, including Chief of the Cabinet of the President of the Republic of Poland and Head of the International Policy Bureau in the Chancellery. He has been the permanent representative at the United Nations since 2001. I will hand the microphone to you if you would come.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. It is my honor and pleasure to be with you today and to attend this event that is focusing on this such an important issue as eradication of the homelessness. And I would actually start by saying I'm so sorry that I will leave soon after I deliver my speech because the works in the GA speeded up today, and I was the co-facilitator of one of the health summits that has actually concluded recently during the high-level week, and we're just adopting resolution on political declarations of this health summit, so I have to be there to defend the results of our work. That's saying sorry. I just also want to say that I thank the working group and homelessness for putting together our gathering and for inviting me to present the perspective of the UN member states, but also maybe not only as a PR of Poland, but also as the co-chair of the group of friends of UN Habitat here in the UN that's actually gathering 50 states of the 50 of the member states. We are sharing. So, but in my preparation, I'm going to focus on my own country, Poland, how we implement policies and programs that are aimed at both ending homelessness as well as preparing persons affected by the homelessness to live independently. We see the realization of both the human rights and to adequate housing as well as the SDG 11. So let me begin by commending the Secretary General's first report on addressing homelessness, in which he comprehensively lays out the existing problems and challenges remaining to properly address homelessness, a phenomenon which should be considered, I really believe, broadly as encompassing a variety of inadequate living conditions. We echo Secretary General's call for human rights-based approach, which involves viewing persons affected by homelessness primarily as right holders instead of welfare recipients. So they are fully human rights holders, not just the welfare recipients. I also believe that discussions like ours today with experts in this topic and you so much involved and engaged in that and the stakeholders will help advance the ongoing efforts with concrete recommendations. I hope I can share with some of our experiences seen as recommendations coming from Poland to our discussion. According to the latest survey, which is concluded biannually in Poland by the Polish Ministry of Family and Social Policy, a bit more than 30,000 homeless persons were identified in my country, of which 82% were men, almost 15% women, and just 3.3% children. So with the population of Poland of 37.7 million, that means the population of homeless is estimated only as less than 0.1% of the total population. It's actually 0.08% of the total population. And the decrease in numbers of homeless persons in almost all age groups has occurred over the years, with one exception, and that's very interesting to notice, for the persons over 60 years. That was a slight increase, actually. So it's sometimes, so you can see, I mean, it's still been just marginal numbers, but still we got this problem of aging, which leads to homelessness. That's something very important to notice. In Poland, providing shelters for persons experiencing homelessness is the primary task of local and regional authorities. The distribution of tasks demonstrates the ongoing discussion, and that's what I will put out for the discussion on as the co-chair of the UN Global Friends of Habitat on localization of the SDGs, which has now been highly relevant in this context and highly relevant also in the general debate on the realization of the SDGs. So localization, because we believe that the local communities know best how to tailor responses to homelessness on the ground. Local regional authorities run temporary housing in the form of shelter, a night shelter, a shelter with care services, and or a keeping facility. Persons experiencing homelessness can also benefit from support in the monetary form and in-kind and service support. Moreover, in 2022, there were 190 street workers accompanying homeless persons in reaching 8 facilities adequate for their situation. Another important tool is an individual program to exit homelessness. It is developed by a social worker or a center together with the homeless person who is actively participating in the process or of exiting homelessness. I believe that those programs do adopt the human rights-based approach to homelessness, which UN Secretary General described in his report, and I refer to. So it's this individual program to exit homelessness. I think it's will be active participation of the persons affected. I think it's a very important tool to discuss about. So central government in Poland has for many years completed the activities of complemented the activities of local governments in the area of counteracting homelessness, especially through a program which is called the Overcoming Homelessness. The program is implemented in the form of an open tender conducted every year. Its main goal is to inspire and support activities undertaken by the non-governmental entities and the stakeholders operating in the area of social welfare. In Poland, there is a good number of civil society, charities, as well as religious organizations who join efforts to end homelessness, and by that, they realize the very idea of a social economy. And I think this is another important notion that should be mentioned here, the social economy, which is the partnership between the public authorities and the charities, NGOs, and all the stakeholders in implementing the socially important programs. So localization and social economy and human rights approach, that's my messages for you today. Last year, more than 10.5 million Polish zloty, which is $2.4 million US, were allocated to subsidize activities carried out under the Overcoming Homelessness program. However, apart from providing temporary aid described above, Polish authorities strive to implement lasting solutions, which are based on the concept that the person experiencing homelessness first and foremost needs to have a stable place of stay, while other needs and problems can be solved afterwards. Such an assumption guides to a program which is can be translated as housing first. In 2022, with more than almost 650 persons in the crisis of homelessness, within 156 women and 487 men, were supported through this non-institutional form, other than shelter housing. So housing first. So, ladies and gentlemen, efforts described above have been instituted in Poland for years. Let me, however, add that last year Poland faced a huge influx of Ukrainian refugees, out of whom over 90% were women with children, who were fleeing the war of aggression that Russia started against Ukraine. So Poland faced a critical question: how to accommodate those refugees properly, so that no one would be left behind, and it would contribute, it won't contribute to the homelessness problem in Poland. So and we're talking about 1.5 million people coming into a country over the period of 3 months, not like years, like 3 months of 1.5 million new inhabitants of the country, and then we are faced with the problem how to face this critical situation without not contributing to the problem of homelessness in Poland or this inadequate housing. It's not just homelessness, it's not inadequate housing. As the first response during the first days and weeks of the war, reception points were established in all regions to provide care for the persons crossing the Ukrainian-Polish border. They ensured the provision of food, resting place, basic medical care, and necessary information. And in peak, there were almost 40 reception points, which have served, as I said, a total of almost 1.5 million persons since the beginning of the operation until the beginning of August this year. Regional local government bodies opened temporary collective accommodation and meals points. Over 500,000 persons took advantage of those points from February 2022 to August this year. But I said it's just 500,000 persons, because that's only about 1/3 of the Ukrainians who were actually received by Poland. So the question is, what happened to the rest of them? And then there's the question. It is just because due to the unprecedented effort of the Polish society, most of the Ukrainian refugees actually found their first accommodation in private homes. So 1 million was actually accommodated in private homes, and 500 in this organized shelter. Yes, those folks who opened their home for refugees did receive compensation. That was the whole trick, because then the government subsidized the sheltering the Ukrainian refugees in the private homes. So they really received compensation from the country's budget to cover their expenses, and in certain cases, but the disability or elderly age of the refugee that they are hosting, they continue to receive it for all the period. I want to stress, however, that owing this extraordinary gesture, documented by the authorities' efforts, and thanks to that, no refugee camp was established in Poland since the war started. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying that Poland, in its efforts to address homelessness, strives to adopt a human rights-based approach, social economy, and localization. We do recognize how significant it is to fully realize the right to adequate housing for every individual, and we will continue our efforts, both at home and internationally, to advance this human right. And I thank you, and really thank you very much for inviting me today. And well, I'll be just sneaking out. I will leave you with my super expert that will actually join us in the panel, so she can also ask more questions for every question that I probably knows better than me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. We are most grateful for your presence, for your assistance that you've left with us for the question and answer period, and also for all that all that Poland is doing for the refugees from Ukraine, 90% of whom are women and children. We certainly appreciate your approach to the issue as rights holders, the fact that Poland has declared affordable housing as a national priority in their country's efforts to address poverty and homelessness. These are the kinds of efforts that we hope provide an example to other member states as we move forward with this issue in light of the Secretary General's report and the General Assembly resolution. So thank you once again on behalf of all of us here at the Working Group to End Homelessness. And I know you have to leave, so please,
Yeah, sorry,
just
sir.
watch the wire on your way out.
They even,
We don't want any
they even
accidents.
split up even more than I expected.
Okay, go.
Thank you, sorry for that.
So much. Watch the wire. Okay. We don't want to lose anybody, especially the good ones. Okay, thank you. As we said, this event is somewhat focused while it's on homelessness in general, what we really determined that we wanted our focus to be was the intersectionality of homelessness. And that's evidenced most especially in the issues of women, and particularly women who had families with their children. And so the next portion of our program is going to focus on that particular topic. We'll have 3 speakers. 2 people will be joining us virtually, who will be people who have had lived experience of homelessness. And then Natalie Monteza will be our next speaker. We'll talk about civil society's role in helping these folks. So our first speaker, Doris, is connected. And Doris Agiapoma, our first speaker, is a native of Ghana who is presently living in Sevilla, Spain. She is a survivor of an abusive domestic employment situation, which forced, well, actually first poverty, abusive domestic employment situation, which forced her to migrate. And I'd like her to tell you her story in her own words. Doris, please begin.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm delighted to share my experience with all of you. My name is Doris Ejapoma. I am 24 years old. I come from Ghana. I have a baby boy. His name is Raidmo Debra. He has 1 year, 9 months, and he is a healthy and happy child. He was born in the year 2022 in Sevilla. I was born in a Christian family. I have 7 sisters and 2 brothers. I remember that we lived a lot of precariousness, and in our house, we couldn't not all go to school. I learned from what my sisters and some people told me. Due to the economic situation of my family, my mother decided to send me to the house of a friend of my parents who live in a more developed city. I worked with her when I was a child. In that house, I lived in fear, violence against me, both physically and morality, making me live situations that I could never imagine. I suffered to send money to my family until one day I decided to run away secret. With the money I had saved, leaving my family behind all been the hardest things I have never experienced. My father, my mother, my sisters, my brothers, nieces and nephews, living my life where I live, my environment, what I already knew, even if it was hard while I was living there. I left my country in 2018. I have passed through these countries: Togo, Benin, Niger, Algeria, and Morocco. The trip took about 3 months. I walked almost all the way. It was, it was very hard. I couldn't only hold on my faith. My God helped me and saved me the strength I needed to cope with so much pain and suffering. On my journey, a lot of people who did companions with whom I had started with the journey. All the walking with no water, no food, etc. It, it, is, it is a very sad memory, even today. In this moment, I kept closer to God. I need Him all through. I have to admit that I also mistreated at times, and it seemed to me that He had abandoned me. When I lived in Morocco, I met the man I married. It was traditional marriage. I became a pregnant, and we lived in the forest of Nado. We went down to two for food and begged in street. One day, the police chased us going up to the forest, and I had a fall from which I lost my baby. Living in the forest is very hard, especially when you are sick. One day, we managed to cross. My husband and I arrived in Forteventura. We were separate again, left me with many fears, alone against on the road. From Forteventura, I was sent to Sevilla, against the fear, the loneliness, the unknown. But this time, God has prepared a family for me, that is Afabi, who welcomed me with open arms, who treated me like no one had ever treated me before, who gave me everything without expecting anything in return. I could not understand that. At first, I thought I was being deceived, that soon I will discover the truth, that He would ask me something difficult, hard. But the days went by and I felt more and more love. At night, I talked to God, my Father, and I asked Him if I was dreaming or if my dream were coming true. How was it possible that I had the right to be a pampered, listened to, love. I felt for the first time a person, a woman, a friend, a sister in a beautiful house where I could share my life experience with other guests who had lived a similar situation to mine. In Afabi, we feel like a family. We all care about each other. We help each other. We comfort each other. We love each other. All the women who are part of this great family receive a special treatment. All our needs are covered, especially those of health and welfare. In one of these medical consultations discovered that I was pregnant. I was very afraid. I did not want to lose my son again. But I was no longer alone. I had so many angels around me who comforted, encouraged, and cared for me that I could not stop thanking my Father in heaven. Today, I am still with the Afari, my home, my family, and God continues to bless every day. I fight for better life for him, better than the one I have lived. I work without rest to achieve my dreams. I continue to learn Spanish. I am steady and I would love to be able to work helping children who have no family, to have my own home, and to be able to fend for myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris. The words
Yeah.
fear and loneliness and loss of a child, these are things that are traumas for every person. In your fragile situation, it must have been terrible. We will, I think your encounter with the Daughters of Charity, being able to feel again like a woman
Yes.
is what we hope will continue to support your growth and your strength. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Mildred Morales. Mildred of Guatemala. Mildred survived a volcano that destroyed her family and her village. Please share your story.
Muy buenos días. Mi nombre es Mildred Teresa Morales. Tengo 29 años de edad y soy originaria de Guatemala. Siendo un día normal en nuestras actividades diarias, el domingo 3 de junio de 2018 me encontraba en mi trabajo sin pensar lo que podía estar ocurriendo ese día en la tarde. Me llamaban por teléfono para darme una noticia terrible. Acababa de suceder la tragedia del volcán. Empecé a llamar a mi familia, pero nadie respondió. Angustiada, empecé a ver de qué manera llegaba al lugar donde ocurrió la tragedia, pero no se podía. Entonces tuve que viajar en motocicleta para poder llegar a donde había sido la tragedia. Pero no se podía, entonces tuve que viajar en motocicleta para poder llegar a donde había sido la tragedia. El volcán había destruido una comunidad completa, sepultó a cientos de personas. Cuando llegué ya eran las 11:50 de la noche. Iba con la esperanza de encontrar a mis hijas en algún rincón que me estuvieran esperando, pero lamentablemente no fue así. Los bomberos me estaban esperando para que pudiera entrar a la morgue temporal y me tocó la experiencia más horrible de mi vida. Tuve que reconocer los cadáveres de mis hijas y mi hermana. De ahí me dediqué a buscar a mi demás familia, que no aparecían. El día viernes encontramos a mi abuela. Luego de eso ya no encontramos a nadie más. Andaba buscando a 4 más de mis dos hermanos varones, mi abuelo y mi primo. En total eran 8. Los días siguientes fui a buscar con palas, azadones y piochas. Incluso pagamos maquinaria para poder mover la tierra, pero no se encontró a nadie más. Lo más duro que pierden muchas familiares, cuando uno pierde muchos familiares a la vez, uno no sabe a quién extrañar o a quién llorar más. Los sobrevivientes fuimos evacuados y llevados a albergues ubicados en escuelas o salones municipales. Luego nos movieron a albergues temporales unifamiliares, los ATUS, que el gobierno había construido provisionalmente. Viviendo ahí conocí a las hijas de la caridad. Ellos estuvieron visitando a los damnificados. Ellas me propusieron que había un proyecto de vivienda, pues yo no había clasificado para las casas del gobierno, pero como el proyecto era a largo plazo, tuve que rentar una vivienda porque vivía antes de la tragedia en un lugar que no era propio. Era una finca en la cual vivía con mis abuelos, mis hermanos y mis hijas. Así tuve que rentar la vivienda y estuve ahí por casi 2 años. Las hermanas de la caridad me estuvieron visitando todo ese tiempo. Yo caí en depresión por casi 6 meses. No dormía, no comía, no quería salir, me conformé, me enfermé. Lo considero psicológico ya que me daba mucho frío y fiebre, pero no tenía ninguna enfermedad. Salía al sol y aunque hubiese mucho calor, me arropaba totalmente. Estuve tentada a caer en el vicio del tabaco. Eso me daba tranquilidad. Para salir de la depresión me refugié en el trabajo. En esa época conocí al que es el papá de mi hijo. Con la ayuda de Dios y las atenciones recibidas, empecé a salir de la depresión. El 26 de diciembre del 2020, en honor al cumpleaños de mi hija mayor, me mudé a mi propia casa, que me donaron gracias al proyecto Bienvenido a Casa, ubicado en Parramos, Chimaltenango. Después de 4 años de la pérdida de mis hijas, resulté embarazada de mi Alan. Él nació el 16 de enero del 2023, justamente en el cumpleaños de mi hija menor y pesando lo mismo que pesó mi hija grande al nacer. Desde que vine a Parramos me he dedicado a trabajar y también aproveché a estudiar un curso de enfermería auxiliar. He trabajado en diferentes lugares como encargada de obras de proyectos, de enfermera y de policía municipal. Debido a que la persona que me cuidaba a mi niño renunció y no encontré a nadie que lo cuidara, tuve que renunciar a mi trabajo. Tengo casi 2 meses de estar desempleada. Sobrevivo de lo que mi marido me envía, quien por cuestiones económicas tuvo que emigrar a los Estados Unidos. Vivo prácticamente sola con mi bebé, ya que mi madre fue la única que sobrevivió, pues vivía 3 kilómetros abajo, donde sucedió la tragedia, pero trabaja en la ciudad capital y nos visita cada 15 días. En mi experiencia emocional, me siento conforme con lo que Dios ha hecho en mi vida, ya que no se cae ni una hoja de un árbol sin que Dios lo permita. Y siempre pienso que nunca se va a recuperar lo perdido, pero sí pueden venir mejores cosas. Mis hijas jamás podrán ser reemplazadas por nadie. Cada hijo tiene un lugar especial en el corazón de una madre. Sin embargo, me siento muy feliz y afortunada con la bendición que Dios me ha dado. tener un techo seguro y propio donde pasar las noches y el resto de mi vida junto a mi hijo Alan. Hoy no tengo que preocuparme por alguien que me pida que desaloje o no tener dinero para pagar un alquiler. Gracias a Dios y a las personas que colaboraron, hoy tengo mi propia casa. Y me gustaría poder presentarles a mi Alan. Él es mi Alan, quien ahora ha llenado mi corazón de alegría y mi vida. Muchas gracias.
Mildred, we are very grateful for the services of the Daughters of Charity who are helping you in your recovery and for your willingness to share such a very heartbreaking story. We aimed in this event to focus on the intersectionality of homelessness, poverty, gender, discrimination, and a lack of access to legal and political rights are threads that run through both of these stories. The other word that comes to mind when we hear the stories of these women is trauma. These women have experienced extensive, long-standing trauma. And obviously, it's not something you get over overnight. I think we can all appreciate the complexity of homelessness and the need to couple housing with supportive services for people who have experienced this form of poverty. We next turn to Natalie Monteza. Natalie is the coordinator of the 13 Houses campaign for the Famden Homeless Alliance. A native of Panama who joined us from the south of France, Natalie has coordinated the 13 Houses campaign of the Famden Homeless Alliance for the past 5 years, with the aim of transforming the lives of 10,000 people experiencing homelessness worldwide. She's on goal, I believe, at this point in 5 years. So she'll be telling us about that. And Natalie she's earned an international relations degree from Brown University in the United States and a public policy master's from the University in Guatemala. Additionally, she's completed diplomas in civil society management, monitoring and evaluation with a human rights perspective. Natalie, please take the mic.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Lydia, and your team and the working group to end homelessness for organizing this event. The Famden Homeless Alliance is very grateful to have the opportunity to share with you this morning about the 13 Houses campaign and our experience in particular on homelessness and the feminization of poverty. Before I start, let me say I'm very grateful to Doris and Mildred for their presentations. They're both participants in 13 Houses projects, and I thank them for their generosity and really for sharing with us their experience of trauma, but also of resilience. For context, I will start with a few words on the FHA and the 13 Houses campaign. And then the second part of my presentation will be on our experience about the challenges faced by women and girls and their right to a safe home. We can go to the slide, please. So the FHA represents an alliance of 156 organizations inspired by the life and works of Vincent de Paul, 17th century priest who organized charity in creative ways. I'll make reference to them in this presentation as the Vincentian family. They are present in 160 countries and concentrate their work on the most excluded and marginalized people experiencing all forms of poverty. In 2017, to celebrate the 400 years of Vincent's work, the heads of the Vincentian family decided to create the FHA to unite efforts around one single thematic, homelessness, which which is an issue affecting around 1 in 8 people on this planet. Its vision is that everyone has a place to call home and a stake in their community.
So,
Slowly,
que no dicen your micro for the translation. There's voice to translation. Say that maybe to review your micro.
to see if the mic is working. Is it connected? Kind of louder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll try it. Let me know if it doesn't work. In 2018, the FHA launched the 13 Houses campaign with the objective of transforming the lives of 10,000 people in 5 years in all countries where there is a dissension present. Almost 5 years on, there are currently 102 projects from 64 countries participating in the campaign. To date, nearly 9,600 people are no longer homeless, thanks to this effort. And we are still updating numbers with the different projects and accepting new ones. So we are quite confident to be reaching the 10,000 soon. So these are the numbers, but the focus of the campaign has not been the number, but rather to promote sustainable impact and local solutions tailored to homeless people's needs and asks. In these projects, every local group of the session family members has provided permanent housing solutions and services for as long as they are needed. So there are as many different solutions as there are projects participating in the campaign. However, we developed some criteria that apply to all projects, which are part of the campaign. The aim of the projects should be to promote the right of everyone to a safe home, to live in security, peace, and dignity. So houses or accommodation should provide a safe place to stay. We do risk assessments, give particular attention to access to water, sanitation, and electricity, and to property of the land and appropriate living space. We also monitor and support target groups beyond house repair and construction. We place particular attention to breaking the cycle of poverty. So we pay attention to education, improving livelihoods with the intention that people will be able to be independent and take care of themselves and of their home. And the third, we also encourage collaboration between the intervention organizations, but also with others who can and should contribute to solutions, including local authorities as well as other civil society organizations in the community. So what have we learned? On the one hand, we have learned nothing new. We have confirmed homelessness is a complex issue that deals with multiple causing factors and present everywhere in every country. But on the other hand, as we try to evaluate projects in a qualitative manner, gathering testimonies like the ones we heard about today, we have been able to clearly see how women and girls are affected by homelessness more than we usually think when we talk about homelessness. There are some specific issues affecting them. So I picked a few examples from the project in the campaign to show this. So in places where conflict is the main driver to homelessness, those who are more vulnerable to violence in those contexts are women and children. And in those places, to concentrate on the worst hit by the conflict means to work with displaced women who have suffered from rape and violence, and whose reconstruction requires not just a safe place to live, but also psychosocial support. When economic hardship is the main driver, due to political issues or natural catastrophes, women have it particularly hard. We heard from Mildred, who went through depression as she lost family members and everything she had after a volcano eruption. She shared with us her belief that if it had not been for the whole house and care that she received, she would still be homeless and facing very difficult economic conditions and depression. We have a number of examples of Venezuelan women fleeing alone and becoming homeless in their destination country, sometimes with as many as 5 children in their care. generating income when they arrive is often more difficult, not only for the lack of papers, but also for the lack of education. And even when they are educated, they cannot work because they have to care for young children who are not old enough to go to nursery or to school. In other settings, as we saw in Spain, the projects welcome women who, because of poverty and because they were girls, were not given the opportunity to access education. Like Doris, sometimes they are sent away by their parents to work as a child, sometimes even sold, and end up running away to seek for a better future, leading to forced migration and exposing them to abuse and exploitation in their journey. In some countries, the projects exist to prevent this type of forced migration, like in Ghana. And this is the photo that you have here, where there's a project exclusively for girls who would otherwise be in the streets and at risk of being trafficked. In projects with people living in slums, garbage slums, adequate housing in rural areas or city suburbs, with children or elderly at their care, or elderly women who are ostracized and have little income generating power because they are widows. And in many cases, despite having a job or a pension or some sort of source of income, this is not enough to take care of basic needs such as food and health, let alone to improve or have access to a decent home. In projects in rural areas, many times we have heard about access to land property as an issue that causes homelessness. And for women, the issue is often critical. They are sometimes legally not allowed to be owners of the land or of the house. So in projects with street homeless people living in the cities, we have also some examples of specific issues affecting women. In the United States, for example, many of the working homeless are women who earn very low salaries and cannot afford rent. We have children at their care or are forced to live in their cars or other unsafe places. In Paris, a day center was opened exclusively for women who used to hide in order to be safe. So to conclude, today we heard a couple of examples of what we've seen throughout the campaign. Under different categories of homelessness, there are some factors that specifically affect women and girls. And it is our conviction that any recommendation for public policy to identify their human rights and adequate standard of living requires that we also address these specific challenges that they face as homeless women and girls. So thank you very much. And if anyone wants to know more about the campaign, there's some material in the back, and I'm ready to give any answers you need. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Natalie. We're so grateful to have you here with us and to hear more about the 13 Houses campaign. You certainly have made it obvious that permanent housing is both a prevention, affordable permanent housing is both a prevention strategy for dealing with homelessness and also a solution. Water, electricity, and sanitation has to be a part of that. But we need to do more. And I think we see that in the victims of this terrible problem that is global. Also, I just want to point out that Natalie mentioned it in several of hers, but also in Mildred's story. Mildred was technically homeless before the volcano erupted. The government would recognize her as someone who was entitled to services because she didn't have a home before. She lived with extended family. And this notion of hidden homeless is something that we have to be very attentive to, because in many ways, this is a whole group of people that lie under the radar. Under the radar. They're not counted in almost any stats you're ever going to see. And the statistics on homelessness or ill-housed people, I think we're up to like 1.6 billion people worldwide are considered ill-housed. and hundreds of millions are actually, quote, homeless. And I would tend to venture a guess that no, very few, if any, and I'll leave this to my colleague Lydia, count people who are these hidden homeless, living with others because they can't afford their own housing units. So I just wanted to point that out as we move forward. And move to our next speaker, who we see this morning, but fortunately, Francesca Di Ferrari, program for UN Habitat in the New York office to us today, and so we are very, very grateful for her work, reality, and for her willingness to step in. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Before I begin, I would like to extend sincere apologies on behalf of Chris Williams, the director of UN Habitat Office in New York, who unfortunately, as she already mentioned, had a family emergency today. Nonetheless, I'm honored to stand before you and share some important insights on intersectionality of homelessness. Can you hear me? Homelessness is often linked to marginalization and inequality. Women, youth, indigenous community, people with disability, migrants and refugees, minorities, the working poor, and LGBT plus person often experience the harshest effect of homelessness. As highlighted in the SG report on inclusive policy and program to address homelessness, as well as some previous publication of UN Habitat, such as cities and pandemic. The COVID pandemic has intensified these vulnerabilities, pushing marginalized groups even closer to homelessness edge. Furthermore, specific population segments, such as women and children, subjected to domestic and gender-based violence, have been compared to remain in unsafe environments, with incidents of abuse potentially escalating during lockdown and curfews. The pandemic has exposed deep-seated inequality and brought to light the limitation of current methods for measuring homelessness, often overlooking its impact of historically marginalized groups. The SG report therefore highlights that to create an accurate picture, information must be gathered from all the corners of society and geographical regions, leaving no one behind. It also highlights how homelessness encompasses a diverse spectrum of circumstances beyond street sleeping, including temporary housing, inadequate condition, and voluntary sharing of accommodation. This heterogeneity underscores the need for nuanced approach, particularly to ensure that the needs and challenges of women, children, and marginalized groups are adequately recognized and addressed. Establishing a clear and inclusive definition of homelessness encompassing broader aspects related to housing exclusion would support government in capturing intersectional specificity and challenge them in decision-making. Narrow definition of homeless, which mainly focus on wrapped, sleeping, and people in emergency accommodation, tend to make the experiences of women and children less visible, and as they are less likely to live on the street, often conceal their gender for safety reasons, and are also less likely to approach emergency shelter before all other options have been exhausted. However, collecting data isn't enough. Bridging the gap between policy and reality necessitates involving those lived experience and promoting inclusive policies and support systems. A promising shift has been recorded toward the participation in policy processes of and accountability to people experiencing homelessness. Member states' response to the survey used for the preparation of this SG report provided some examples. For instance, the Advisory Committee of Homelessness that advised the Government of Canada to redesign its homelessness strategy included people with lived experiences of housing and exclusion. The National Housing Council of Canada established to monitor the impact of the new housing strategies, also including members with lived experience of homelessness and housing exclusion. In Argentina, a newly adopted law expressly established a duty of state for the promotion of the exercise of political rights by people experiencing homelessness and their participation in the planning, implementation, and evaluation of the public policies. The SG report advocated for an approach to anti-homelessness, which is people-centered. Research show that there is no single path into and out of homelessness. Addressing people needs require a personalized tailored response. For example, the provision of support from family reconnection, support with mental health and substance use issues, vocational training, and support in finding employment, psychological support. Focusing on prevention, developing tailored cross-sectoral strategies aimed at addressing both the structural factor and individual risk associated with homelessness. This approach encompasses universal prevention to minimize the risk of homelessness through inclusive housing and social policies, and targeted prevention, addressing the specific needs of at-risk groups, such as young people transitioning from foster care, people living in correctional facilities, and other institutions. Prevention represents a proactive commitment to ensure that everyone has the safe place to call home and the opportunity to live with dignity. Evidence-based, efficient data collection methodology based on an agreed definition of homelessness and operational framework are critical to ensure effective policy on homelessness. A clear understanding of the main drivers, as well as the design of tailored services responding to the existing needs. These currently represent a major challenge globally. When devising data collection methodology is critical to avoid the risk of excluding those who are not statistically visible, with women and children representing a big share of the undercounted. To this end, the SG report recommends to account not only for quantitative, but also qualitative evidence, for example, oral testimony, photographs, or videos. Finally, the SG report highlights the need to scale up intergovernmental effort working group on housing, coordinating to end homelessness. While housing alone is not the silver bullet to end homelessness, addressing housing exclusion, especially for marginalized groups, is critical to break the cycle of poverty and exclusion. UN Housing stands ready to member states use houses and ensure clear limitation.
Thank you so much, Francesca. We certainly do applaud the progress that we're beginning to see as a result of the General Assembly resolution and the Secretary General's report. I think your statement that there is no single path in or out of homelessness, no silver bullet, is something that we will walk away with from this conversation today, because certainly we see the complexity of this issue. Certainly, we're all starting to talk the same language, a human rights-based approach, inclusive housing, coupled with social services and evidence. We need evidence-based data to move forward on this very, very complex issue. So with that, we will turn to our final speaker, and who will wrap up the formal part of the presentation, and hopefully we'll then be able to move into some Q&A. Leilani Farha, let's see her up on our screen there, is the Global Director of the SHIFT and the former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, a position she held from 2014 to 2020. The SHIFT was launched in 2017 with the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and United Cities and local government. A lawyer by training, Ms. Farha has worked for over 20 years, both internationally and domestically in Canada, on the implementation of the right to adequate housing for the most marginalized groups, and extensively on economic, social, and cultural rights, raising awareness about the gender dimensions of these rights. We are looking forward to learning more about the shift and the steps we all need to take to create a future with a home for all. Leilani?
Thank you so much. Thanks to the organizers of this event for including me and for just hosting this event. It's so important that we keep the issue of homelessness on the international agenda, as well as, of course, domestic agendas. I also wanted to give a huge thanks to Doris and Mildred in particular for their courage in telling their stories to, an audience they don't know, and for trusting us with your stories. Homelessness is the issue that probably keeps me up at night and racks my heart and brain. And when I hear the stories of Doris and Mildred and the many others, I just know we have to do better across the planet. So homelessness is one of the most significant human rights issues, social issues confronting every society today. We know that. The sad truth is reports from across the globe, with the exception of a few places, indicate that it is only growing, and it has only grown since COVID, which is the exact opposite of what should have happened, obviously. COVID exposed to us the importance of home in so many ways. And as I said back in March 2020, home is the frontline defense against a deadly virus. But as we saw today, it is the frontline defense against so many other things as well. The Secretary General's report notes that during COVID, we saw some really extraordinary measures to try to protect people living in homelessness in many places. But unfortunately, many of those measures were short-term. And what we've seen is a return to sort of old ways now that the big threat of COVID is over. And this return to old ways has happened despite the heightened fragility and vulnerability of many people and families. So we've seen a return to evictions and forced evictions, a return to upgrading of informal settlements in ways that are not human rights compliant and that really challenge and result in the displacement of families and households in many instances. And we have seen a return or maybe an expansion of the commodification of housing, which we know, some of us know, is related to homelessness. What I find sort of unfortunate and something worth thinking about, and I'll return to this later in my comments, is that at the same time, what we have seen since COVID is many economies are actually doing okay. They're actually expanding in some instances. We're seeing what they call GDP, gross domestic product growth in many instances. And so we have to scratch our heads and ask ourselves, what is this when we see economic growth and a growth in homelessness? But before I go there to unpack that a little bit, I always like to go back to basics. And with homelessness, we have to go back to basics. And I want to just dwell in the idea that homelessness is a violation, a prima facie violation of human rights and the right to housing. I just want to remind us why that is, why we understand homelessness as a violation of human rights. And, in the international human rights world, we kind of understand that if there is a central civil and political right, if there's like a key one, a foundational civil and political right, it is the right to life. And if there is a central or key or sort of a right around which we can organize on the social and economic side, it's the right to housing. And it is, in fact, the interdependence of those two rights that really helps us to understand why homelessness is a violation of rights. And it is the relationship between morbidity and mortality and homelessness that makes it a human right violation. In other words, we know that homelessness puts in jeopardy the health and the life of those who are homeless. And we've heard stories today that attest to that. And so we know that the life expectancy of someone living in homelessness anywhere in the world is half that of someone who is properly, adequately housed. And it is that we have to dwell in, that we are talking about a life and death matter here. And the vulnerability of women and children in particular has been underscored today. And I'm very happy for that because it is women's lives and children's lives that are so at risk with homelessness, as well as others, of course. What I like about the human rights frame is that it actually helps expose not just the individual stories, the individual circumstances that lead to homelessness, but it helps us understand the structural components to homelessness, the systems that are helping to engender homelessness. And I like the human rights frame because it turns upside down common notions of people who are homeless. In my report on homelessness, when I was rapporteur, I documented the very horrible ways in which people living in homelessness are referred to and are treated, the stereotypes and the discrimination. Homeless people as criminals, as thieves, as lazy, as encroachers. I mean, so many despicable ways to view homeless people. And a rights framing says that's wrong, that's incorrect, that homeless people aren't at worst criminals and aren't at best charity cases. Homeless people are rights holders. They are people whose rights are being violated, and governments have a responsibility to them. So I only have about a minute and a half left, and I never like to end a presentation on a negative note. I do want to talk about some of the developments and some of the things that we are seeing, some of the things we aren't seeing that we need to see if we are ever going to address homelessness at a global level or at a local level. First of all, I want to say that we know that, for example, the European Union as a region has recently committed as a region to ending homelessness by 2030. It's ambitious, perhaps doable, but that commitment is so very important at regional level. At the UN level, we have the resolution that's been referred to several times now. We have the Secretary General's report. And people may say, oh, UN stuff, writing on paper, gets put on a shelf, dust collects. But I beg to differ. These are foundational pieces that, if used by advocates, civil society, people living in homelessness, can really make a difference. It is, in fact, how I got my start in the area of the right to housing, was using international documents to push forward with states. And the other thing I'll say that is progress is that I have never met a government, local, regional, national, that was proud of having a homeless population within their borders, or within their region. I have never met a government who wanted to defend homelessness. That is a very important, it may seem thin, but it is an important starting point for us to move forward. And I know I'm out of time. I just want to add one thing because I think this is super important. So I beg indulgence here. One of the things that I fear is that our current economic and housing systems that are in place in both the global north and the global south are in fact producing homelessness. That the way our economies are structured in both the north and the south are actually wired to produce homelessness, which then suggests that if we're going to undo homelessness, we have to undo those systems. I am talking about the way in which finance is playing such a dominant role in housing in both the north and the south. And I say that because in the north, we see big financial actors really invading the housing space and making, I believe, contributing to the production of homelessness. But in the global south, what we're seeing is a drive toward mortgage-based housing systems that leave many people behind. I'll end there. Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Leilani. We certainly appreciate your explanation of the human rights-based approach and giving us more points to make in our conversations with another state. I have to say that when we were planning this program, we got to the part about a vision for the future. Jean and I looked at each other and said simultaneously, Leilani, and you did not disappoint. So thank you very much. All right, we made it. We are now at the point in which we can hear from you. And so I know we're monitoring the chat rooms for questions, but certainly we welcome any of you to come up and to take the mic and to ask any of our presenters questions or to make comments that you feel you'd like to make from your own experiences. And please introduce yourself and be brief so that the next person can get up. So the floor is now open, but you're going to have to use the mic. Stand here so you can speak into the other mic as well. Do we have any questions online or comments that we want? Okay, so we're in the room first. Do we begin with an online comment and then you folks can get ready? Okay. We're out of practice in the in-person work, huh? We are very out of practice.
I really hope this works. I'm sorry, the microphone has been kind of quiet. This is a paraphrase of a bunch of different questions that have been raised about discrimination against different people who experience homelessness, racism and discrimination against LGBTI persons in particular, and what are some ways that service providers and governments can address those issues. A similar question came in on data, stating on the issue of hidden homelessness, saying that for many being counted statistics means further violence, and in countries where racial data is used to specifically target vulnerable countries, staying under the radar, so to speak, becomes a survival instinct, and that some governments use data and to target marginalized and vulnerable communities, particularly citing displacement of Indigenous persons. So if anyone has any comments on that, thanks.
Let's take it. Let's see, I can get this to you. Like this. And I think that's as far as it's going. Yeah.
Well, I think it's not part of what I say also during my presentation. That is a big issue, and actually as a UN Habitat and UN, we are working with member states. As you know, we referenced about the resolution that 2 years ago called for the report. Now we have a report with text to all the input from all the member states that participate and civil society. We have a suggestion of indicators, And I have very good news that the core group that submitted the resolution 2 years ago have decided to come forward and submit another resolution this year. What we are aiming and trying to lobby, and we are welcome all the kind of support from you as a group, is to have a definition that compile, as I was explaining in my presentation, all these points, and it would allow us to gather information, not to have anybody left behind, because as we say, marginalized groups are a reality. Definitely, we know that every country has its own policy, has priorities, but to have a baseline globally that we all agree on and try to comprehend everybody would allow us as the UN to work towards monitoring the homelessness issues and inclusivity worldwide. So I hope this is good news for everybody, and that for the next few weeks we will work hard trying to have this resolution the most comprehensive possible and more inclusive. Really, our motto of the Agenda 2030 is leaving no one behind. So that is our aim, especially for this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. UN Habitat is a good friend, and they keep us moving forward in this issue. So we appreciate that, and we know that we all the members of the working group will be working very hard over the next few months with you, and with the people who are experiencing homelessness. Thank you. Yes, Angela?
Thank you very much, Angela Lee from Mercy International, and thanks for this event. It's fantastic. I have a question for Liliane, and that is around the financial systems that you're talking about, because it's clear that you state financial systems are perpetuating homelessness. And so I'm wondering, I know it's not simple, and without trying to simplify it too much, is there one suggestion you could make about our financial infrastructure that we could perhaps start to really use as an instrument of advocacy? I know the Secretary General talks about the financial architecture needing to change, but can you suggest something in relation to homelessness? Thank you.
Thanks for that question, and certainly not an easy one to answer. Again, I think it was Francesca who said there's no silver bullet. There's no silver bullet. What I really like that I'm seeing movement on at the UN level is human rights-based economies. So that's where you structure your economy toward human rights outcomes. So there's more discussion about that than there has been previously. I would agree with that. And what needs to happen is an approach to policy making where every decision taken by every level of government is sort of put through what I call a human rights sieve, and it would have to produce human rights outcomes to pass, basically, to go through the sieve and to become a policy or a law. So much of what we're doing right now wouldn't meet that test. And certainly with respect to the dominance of financial actors in the housing sector, that would have to change. So it would be, unacceptable, for example, for financial actors to receive any public benefits, public dollars, tax breaks, tax waivers, fee waivers, et cetera, if they weren't producing human rights outcomes, which would be social housing, deeply affordable housing, and really contributing and being co-responsible for addressing housing need. That is we are nowhere near that, but that's the kind of, that's a high level way of talking about this, but that's the kind of thinking that I think we need states to really embrace. States are very far from any understanding of who is homeless and why they are homeless. There's a real pathology that attaches that states attach to homelessness. National level governments don't understand it at all. They often, well, a lot of national level governments don't understand it. I shouldn't say all. A lot of them want to view this as a local issue and not recognize their own role through national level laws and policies that are contributing to homelessness. So there's a lot of work to be done. I just want to give one small example. Recall the G20 meeting that took place in India recently, and I don't want to single out India. This could have happened in any other G20 state. There was an immediate move to clean up homeless people and shelters. I mean, really, to dismantle shelters in and around the site of the G20 visit. And not a single of the other 19 countries spoke up to say, hey, that would be a violation of human rights when you go to do that before our meeting. That just shows you, right, where we're at. I'll end there.
Good thing. How we doing online?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Simon. I was invited here by Dr. Samas from St. John's University. My question kind of follows up the previous question, and in relation to when Leilani was speaking about the efforts to dismantle homelessness on a global level and how big entities like the UN and the EU are making strides and resolutions to end homelessness. My question for the panel, anyone can answer, not just Leilani, but what does it look like on an individual basis as like day-to-day citizens to help that end goal to end homelessness?
Thank you.
I would like to take a little bit of Leilani's presentation and this question to highlight we still have not changed our mentality of look everything from the economic aspect, and I think it works from government, individual, and everybody. We talk about economic growth. I mean, we know that the 3 pillars of the UN are social, economical, environmental. But what we do, we always talk about economic growth, we go economic achievement. Then with those achievements, we usually damage the environment and the social aspect, and then we create a measurement to mitigate those. But actually, we don't think with the 3 pillars together. So how we change our mentality of addressing every issues, and this is across every issue, but then in fact also housing. Housing is for everybody, not only for government. I mean, for rich people, I say, oh, I have a little extra money, I buy another house, it's an investment, I want to rent it out. This is only attitude to see housing as an asset instead of a home, something that is, so when we change this mentality, when we take a decision, even personal decision, what is the impact of my decision economically for me, but for the world, environmentally for me, for the world, and socially for me, for the world, that we will see a completely different world. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments? No? I would just like to say that FHA is quite an example of a model of what can be accomplished when individuals group up, especially individuals who share a common mission and a common purpose, and they're willing to work together. I'm sure it wasn't easy to get to the tour very close to this goal of 10,000, but it also wasn't easy to get all these various groups working under one umbrella, but it really does make a difference. And now I hear we have a comment online.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I was just going to respond to something Francesca just said, which triggered for me the thought, which is, we know that the commodification of housing is contributing to homelessness. We know it's eating up housing. We know it's providing housing for the wrong people, et cetera. But there's another side to it that just struck me, which is, of course, if we as societies in the North and South are going to privilege housing as a commodity, as an investment, et cetera, we can then think what that does, what value that places or lack of value that places on people who do not have the commodity, right? That goes directly to this issue of discrimination against those who have no home. And there is such a entrenched view globally that if you don't have the money to own a home, you are somehow a lesser person. And that is what we have to overcome. And that's what I love about human rights, because human rights is a level playing field. It puts everyone on the same, right, at the same level. Everyone has human rights. And so it doesn't matter whether you have money or not, you're still entitled to an adequate, affordable, habitable home, et cetera. I just want to say one other thing. I actually think governments need to go on campaigns, education campaigns. First, they have to educate themselves about homelessness, which is in the SG's report, actually. But then we need new narratives, and we need governments to help build those new narratives. Individuals need to embrace the new narrative of homeless people being rights holders, but governments need to support new narratives as well, and push those forward. And I actually even mean, and I've pitched this to my own government here in Canada, like, we need ad campaigns, like literally campaigns exposing the truth. We used to do that in at least the North American context around violence against women, for example. We did it around smoking. We've done it around wearing a seatbelt. And I really feel like we need to start doing some like basic kind of education campaigns around homelessness and its systemic causes.
Thank you. We have one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. Okay? Do you have much on that?
Thank you. Just on the subject of, I guess, some of the ideological aspects of housing and homelessness, I was wondering about how we advocate for adequate housing without privileging what's perhaps the ideal of some cultures and not others, and the ideal of an economic growth model versus sustainable growth model, that every nuclear family must or should have one roof to live under, rather than perhaps finding a definition for adequate housing or standards or criteria for adequate housing that don't necessarily specify this is the correct model for how housing should look, that every, the single family home with its own yard, kind of a suburban type model that tends to be privileged as an ideal, and maybe isn't economically or rather environmentally ideal or feasible, especially not everywhere.
And now I'm giving it to Jean because she can go there. Anyone that want to try to respond? I think one of the ways that we've been working towards changing the narrative is simply by coming up with a definition of homelessness that is specific enough to work with in terms of data collection, etc., and general enough to encompass the global north, the global south, the first world, the privileged, the people who are not as privileged. Okay, so I think there is an issue, and that is an issue that we'll be moving forward on this next resolution. We've got to broaden our understanding. I'm going to introduce Jean Quinn to wrap up our program and turn it back to who's there. Leilani, you want to come up?
I'll be very brief. I didn't hear the woman's name who asked the question, but a human rights-based approach really puts, and someone, I think Francesca talked about this, I'm not sure, puts people at its center. And so generally, not just with homelessness, but with the right to housing broadly, governments should really be in discussion with people who need better housing or housing. And those discussions should lead to solutions. And it's through those discussions that governments would learn that people don't all want a single family home with a picket fence, that they can't afford that they don't want it, that it doesn't work for family constellations, et cetera. And so really understanding that rights holders are experts in their own lives is also part of that learning curve for governments, because people really do know how they want to organize their lives, and they've got brilliant ideas. And rest assured, especially in the global South, a mortgage-based housing system based on a single unit and a down payment is probably not what most people in housing need or looking for.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that as well? In terms of the definition, Leilani, it's to do with encouraging member states and governments to actually do something about homelessness. They will own it if there's a definition.
Let me just introduce for anyone in this room who doesn't know her, Jean Quinn. Jean Quinn is the past chair of the working group to end homelessness. She's the executive director of Unanima International and the chair of the NGO Committee on Social Development. She has a multitude of talents, an amazing amount of energy, and we're so privileged that to be able to work with her on this issue of homelessness. She was also one of the founding members of this group and has worked tirelessly to bring this issue before member states and to bring those two resolutions to fruition. And I think she was the most anxious person I knew waiting for that Secretary General's report. So Jean, if you would wrap this up.
Thank you so much, Marianne. And as you said, we're from Unanima International, and I'm here with Liana from the office as well. And I think we actually focused on women, children and girls, because for me, my passion is where can we break the cycle? And I've been a practitioner for a long, long time. And so that's really where we are continually wanting to do something about. And we have put together many publications on the intersectionality of homelessness. And we're about to do our sixth one now, which is around children, how children are affected by the homelessness that they experience as distinct from adults. I'd like to thank the ambassador for coming today. We know it's a really busy time here for us at the UN, and he came at delighted actually that Poland came, because they're a good example of practical ways of including people who have an experience of homelessness. So it's not just the managers and the local authority, they're asking the people, which is really what I feel passionate about. The people who have an experience are actually the experts. So I was delighted to hear that from the ambassador. I think all of us will say that hearing the lived experience of Doris and Mildred takes your breath away. But we have to hear that experience and learn from it. As a practitioner, I would always say that people who have an experience of homelessness experience trauma. They are so traumatized from the experience. So if you hand somebody a house that's had the experience of Mildred, she's delighted to have a roof over her head to begin with. But from down here, her experience would come up here. And she talked about that depression, you know, not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, etc. So unless we're able to do that support in the work we do, we won't have the experience or the expertise of those who experience homelessness. I was really, really grateful to them for their interventions, and to meet Alan as well. I think here we are, the next generation, and he's going to have a good experience because his mother is in a good place. Natalie, thank you for introducing us to the complexity of homelessness. It's not any one issue. It's just a multiplicity of issues that affects homelessness, and it's in no way straightforward. I was really pleased you brought out the issue of widows, and those really are left behind and denied of land because of who they are. So I think that's really important to understand. Francesca, will you give our best to Chris? But he had a very good first person replacing him. Thank you so much in terms of helping us to understand data and how we cannot do without data. I know Lydia's here, wherever she is somewhere, who constantly talks about that, because we cannot do anything about homelessness unless we have the data. Lilani Farah has been just such a good friend to us as a working group to end homelessness right through these 3 years. Every time we would say, can you help us with this, that, and the other, you were always there. And I find you extraordinarily inspirational. And in terms of the human rights approach to homelessness, and you talked about that foundational right, I think that to me was significant today, that it's foundational to have that human rights approach to homelessness in terms of adequate housing. And always to remember, for all of us, that homeless people are rights holders. They're not homeless for life. It's not a life sentence. It's something that happens along the way, and that we all journey together with whoever has that experience to end the homelessness. Last but not least, I want to thank Marianne, who's been a great partner in this ministry, working with people who are out of home. And we've been in touch with each other, I think, on a 24-hour basis since July, when we sat in the room upstairs putting together this event. I think you will say that it's been a great success for the working group to end homelessness. Having had 2 resolutions, we're a working group, we're not a committee, 2 resolutions within 3 years. I think that's fairly good success. Wherever it goes to the next place, we will continue the journey. Thank you all very, very much indeed for attending.
Thank you, Dean. And I think we're ready to close down, but I would be remiss if I didn't actually name some names, because we did have a group that worked on this from the working group. And I certainly want to thank Lydia Stas, of course, whose momentum got us all off the ground and moving. And she is really a dynamic chair for our group, but also what we call Task Force 2, which ended up working on this event. Okay, and that was led by Jimmy Walters from the Sisters of Charity Federation. He was social media posting. Cecily Kern from Mercy International, Dr. Ifenwaya Ofang, Dr. Linda Sama, Pat Muley from the International Association of Charities, Patricia Flaherty, and Tiffany Conley, who is an amazing person. And you want her on your committee when you have to do something like that. Trust me, she's just terrific. And Tiffany, we can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. We're very grateful to the Fam Van Housing Alliance, who provided financial support for this event, to UN Habitat, who is such a good friend to the working group and who co-sponsored this event. And both here and in Nairobi, people were contributing, and we really appreciate this Francesca Leonetti in Nairobi, who was instrumental in helping us shape the program. So we thank everyone, and we thank all of you for coming, for being a part of this, and we certainly hope that you'll all mobilize. We have a lot of work to do in the next 2 months, which we'll get to, and we will get done, and we will get our new resolution. And when it comes out, really take it to your groups, talk to people at the local, the national, and the international level. We've got to keep this ball rolling. The momentum has started, but homelessness is a huge issue globally. And while it is not something, and definitely is not something that member states like talking about. So we really need to encourage them to address this issue and to talk about it. Thank you so much for being here. We love having you. Thank you.